Good evening. I can hear you. I can see you.
Sure. Thank you very much. Let me start the event. So good evening, everyone. It is 7 p.m. Western Indonesia time, and we have, I'm pretty sure, an insightful discussions tonight titled Terrorism in Southeast Asia. But first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Januari Pratama Nuratri Trisnaningtyas. You can call me Ratri, that's my middle name, or you can simply call me Januari, that's my first name. I am a lecturer at International Relations Department of Universitas Pembangunan Nasional Veteran Jawa Timur, which is located in Surabaya, Indonesia. I'm responsible to guide the discussions tonight. And as you may know, we have a very special guest tonight, an expert in international terrorism who willing to share the knowledge and experience with us, Professor Rohan Gunaratna. Good evening, professors. Thank you for joining us today. It was a pleasure to see you, although through the Zooms. But before we start, let me read a brief introduction of Professor Rohan. So, Professor Rohan Gunaratna is a professor of security studies in S.Rajaratnam School of International Studies, Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. He obtained his master's degree at the University of Notre Dame and his doctoral degree at the University of St. Andrew. Beside a professor of security studies, he's also a director general at Institute of National Security Studies, a honorary professor at Sir John Kotawala Defense University, a senior fellow in Combating Terrorism Center at United States Military Academy at West Point, and a director of International Central for Political Violence and Terrorism Research, Nanyang Technological University. The Professor Gunaratna also wrote some well-known books about terrorism, such as Inside Al-Qaeda, Global Network on Terror, War and Peace in Sri Lanka, The Three Pillars of Radicalizations, Needs, Narrative, and Networks. And I think this is the latest book he wrote. Then Countering Terrorism, Can We Meet the Threat of Global Violence? The Terrorist Threat from Thailand, Jihad or Quest for Justice, the Global Jihad Movement, Terrorist Rehabilitations, the US Experience on Iraq, Pakistan, Terrorism Ground Zero, and I believe many more. You can easily find his book by Googling his name. So, talk about the terrorism. We all know that 9/11 attack marked the start of the war against terrorism, known as War on Terror. And since then, the world has begun to put an eye towards terrorism as a serious threat at the individual and state level and even internationally. Year after the event of 9/11, the Bali bombing also took place, which also shocked the international community. Subsequently, a series of terrorist tragedy occurred in Southeast Asia, not to mention in Indonesia, in Thailand, in the Philippines, and the other countries as well. It was such a big question, actually. What happened in Southeast Asia? Does this terror action have anything to do with the 9/11 tragedy, or maybe terrorist networks such as Al-Qaeda or ISIS? Does Southeast Asia have the strength and potential with regards to the terrorist networks, and how does it actually work? We might find the answer in Professor Rohan's explanations tonight. And for the participants, we'll have a Q&A sessions after this, so please stay tuned. And without further ado, I would like to invite Professor Rohan for his sessions tonight. So Professor, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. The threat in Southeast Asia today from terrorism is a reflection of the global threat of terrorism. The global threat of terrorism originated in phases, and the very beginning of the first wave of global terrorism was 1968, when the Palestinian terrorist groups, they mounted attacks in the Middle East. And that began the contemporary wave of terrorism. So the first set of terrorist groups that were active in the Middle East when the contemporary wave of international terrorism began were the Palestinian and the Lebanese terrorist groups. In fact, the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, it had a very special military wing called Fatah. And in that, a very secret unit called the Black September Organization attacked in Munich during the Olympics. And this attack informed the whole world the threat of international terrorism. So the very first wave of international terrorism is 1968, starting in the Middle East. The second wave of terrorism that we have seen, the second wave of international terrorism we have seen, started in 1979. In 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan on Christmas Day, 1979. And as a result, we saw that a new wave of terrorism emerged, largely a religious wave of terrorism. They were called the Mujahideen, those who fought the Soviets. And Bin Laden, Osama bin Laden, who later did the 9/11 attack, he traveled from Saudi Arabia to Pakistan. That was the frontline state to fight terrorism in Afghanistan. And he was joined by Abdullah Azam. And Azam is a Palestinian Jordanian. He was in Egypt, later in Saudi Arabia, and he too came to Pakistan to fight. And together they established a group called the Al-Qaeda Al-Sulba. And this group later staged the 9/11 attack. So the first wave of terrorism started in 1968 in the Middle East, Palestinian and Lebanese groups. Then in 1979, we saw the beginning of another wave of terrorism with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, with the Iranian Revolution, and also a group of religious fanatics seized the mosque in Mecca. And the French GIGN, the elite forces, had to go in and neutralize the threat. So the events in 1979, the Soviet invasion and the Mujahideen response to it, the Iranian Revolution, where the Iranians' revolutionary forces came to power. And of course, what happened in Saudi Arabia, where a mosque was seized, demonstrated that a small group can capture power or a small group can fight a superpower. So that also gave a lot of courage and a template for other groups worldwide. The third wave of international terrorism was the 9/11 attack. On September 11th, 2001, we saw that Al-Qaeda, the group led by Osama bin Laden, the ideologue was Abdullah Azam, they mounted attacks against the United States, America's most iconic landmarks. The World Trade Center, North Tower and South Tower, the Pentagon. And fourth plane was heading to, can you tell me where the fourth plane was heading? It was heading to the US Congress because the Capitol Hill is on a hill. It was difficult for them to strike the White House because it's covered with trees. Of course, the passengers fought. And then that plane crashed in Pennsylvania. So 9/11 was the beginning of the contemporary wave of terrorism, phase 3. Phase 1, again, the Lebanese-Palestinian conflicts is byproduct. Phase 2, the Iranian Revolution, Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, and the siege of the mosque in Saudi Arabia. Phase 3 is the 9/11 attack. The 9/11 attack had a very big influence globally. That is, it galvanized so many other terrorist groups to mount attacks. One of the groups 9/11 attack galvanized was a terrorist group in Indonesia. Can you tell me the name of that group? It is called Jamaah Islami. It was led by a man called Abu Bakr Bashir. I interviewed him. I also interviewed many members of that group. They attacked Bali, October 12th, 2002. They killed over 200 Indonesians and 88 Australians and other nationalities. So the Bali attack became the worst terrorist attack in Southeast Asia. And Bali attack was staged by a group called Jamaah Islamiyah that traveled to Pakistan and later went to many other countries to build their ideology in Southeast Asia. Jamaah Islam members came to Singapore, came to Malaysia, went to Thailand, went to the Philippines, and also went to Australia. There are 44 Australian members of Jamaah Islamiyah. And I interviewed the leader of that group, who recently died. So I want to share with you that Jamaah Islamiyah is the regional terrorist network, while Al-Qaeda is the global terrorist network. One segment of Jamaah Islamiyah remains loyal to Al-Qaeda because Al-Qaeda armed them, trained them, financed them, and directed them. But another segment of Jamaah Islamiyah came under the influence of Aman Abdul Rahman. And I have interviewed him also. You can see my interview of Aman Abdul Rahman on the internet. I may be one of the few people who have interviewed him extensively. He's sentenced to death. And he explained about his ideological frame or the ideological window. So I want to share with you that Aman Abdul Rahman subscribed to the philosophy of the Islamic State. That is a group that was founded by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi in Iraq. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was also trained in Afghanistan. Abu Bakr Bashir himself traveled to Afghanistan. And today we have both Al-Qaeda linked groups and Islamic State groups, linked groups in Southeast Asia. So let me share with you that in Indonesia, the current TNI commander, the commander-in-chief of the Indonesian Armed Forces, General Andika, he mounted a very, very important operation in 2002 in Bogor. He captured a man called Omar al-Faruq. Omar al-Faruq was the Al-Qaeda representative in Southeast Asia. So you can see that even Arabs came to Southeast Asia and operated. They operated both in the Philippines especially in Mindanao, where they had a training base to train Southeast Asians. So the first training base for Southeast Asians was in the Sada camp in Kuram Agency in Pakistan. The second training base was in Afghanistan. And subsequently, a third training base was created called Hudaybiyah in Mindanao. And later, Hudaybiyah shifted and Jabal Quba was created. And then subsequently, there were other training camps in the Philippines, south, as well as in eastern Indonesia, Poso and in Maluku. Umar Farooq was involved in the training. So let me share with you that the wave of terrorism that we are witnessing in Southeast Asia, they were all trained either in Pakistan and Afghanistan, or they were trained in the Philippines and in Indonesia. But we also have, with the emergence of the Islamic State in 2014 in Iraq and Syria, number of Indonesians and Malaysians and Filipinos and Singaporeans traveled to Iraq and Syria. A few of them came back, and they also staged attacks. So this is a very quick introduction into the contemporary wave of global terrorism, contemporary wave of regional terrorism in Southeast Asia. And now I want to focus on how do we respond to the threat of terrorism. How the state can strike back to protect the state and to protect its citizens. State has a social contract with its citizens. The state has to constantly ensure that the citizens are looked after, cared for. And when they do that, the citizens will continue to support the state. So there are 4 principal strategies to fight terrorism. One is prevention. You prevent extremist ideologies from taking root. In the case of Southeast Asia, the religious ideologies of Southeast Asia came through a great religion, Islam, that has brought civilization and culture and religion. But unfortunately, because the religious space was not tightly regulated, the local and traditional Islam of Southeast Asia was replaced partly by Salafi Wahhabism. And through Salafi Wahhabism, these extremist ideologies took root in Southeast Asia. And through that, we saw a very small number of people embraced intolerance towards other religious groups and other religious communities. That is why, without any hesitation, they went and killed people whom they had labeled as unbelievers or non-believers. The ideology came from a doctrine called Tawheed, the oneness of God. Every Muslim believes in the oneness of God, but when you operationalize it politically, what happens is you start to attack people who don't believe in your God, then it becomes a national security threat. So I want to share with you the first aspect is to control the religious space. we have to ensure that extremism, no one shifts to religious extremism. God, Prophet, and many other scholars of Islam have cautioned people about religious extremism. In fact, every chapter of the Quran starts with the verse mercy, except one chapter. So Islam is full of mercy. So we must never allow, in the name of Allah, for people to go and kill. But globally, most amount of people are killed in terrorist attacks, using, misusing, and abusing religion. So that is why if any country has good Muslim religious leaders and secular leaders, there will be no terrorism. So we have to make sure that the religious leaders we train and we educate, they constantly speak about the beauty of other religions, of Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity, Judaism, Sikhism, Manichaeism, Zoroastrianism, other religions. If you only speak about Islam, then you cannot build a moderate, tolerate Muslim community. So religious leaders have the principal role to create moderation, toleration, and coexistence. The second responsibility is with the intelligence services and the law enforcement agencies and the military forces. They must develop high-grade, high-quality intelligence of the religious institutions of this world, because most of the terrorism is coming out of the manipulation and the misinterpretation of religion. So religious institutions must be very closely monitored, especially if you find anyone is speaking ill of another religion. And they must make sure that every religious cleric is certified by the religious authorities. Religious cleric cannot preach without a license. There must be a asatisa recognition scheme. And if any mosque or if any madrasa produce a terrorist, government must take firm action to investigate who preached extremism. And that is why the law enforcement, especially the police, the intelligence and military, has a huge role to monitor what is happening in the physical space and in the social media. Because the extremists and the terrorists have created so many websites, online sites, including in Indonesia. Every day I am looking at those sites. As long as you permit those sites, you will have periodic terrorism. Every month, there will be an incident. There will be an arrest. So, law enforcement, military and intelligence services, their first goal should be prevention and preemption so that there will be no attack. Third is, if there is an attack, government must respond very decisively, very effectively. So they must have what is called the tactical or the operational forces on the ground and ready, working with the intelligence community, with the military, with the police to respond. Normal police cannot respond to a terrorist incident. They must be highly trained and they must be exceptionally well equipped. In Indonesia, there is an exceptionally talented force called Densus 88, D88. It is one of the best counterterrorism units in the entire world. They have prevented so many attacks. So I want to share with you that D88 should be expanded and should operate everywhere in Indonesia and even operate overseas, because Indonesian terrorists are operating abroad, Malaysia, in Turkey, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan. The fourth response should be to rehabilitate terrorists. And this is where Indonesia has to do better than what it has. When a terrorist is arrested or when an extremist is arrested, the mind of that person should be reviewed closely by a team of psychologists or counselors, by religious experts, clerics or ulema, by social workers, should study him and his family, should work with teachers, because teachers can change the way he thinks, should work with vocational instructors, should work with artists, so that this man who is taken to custody or this woman who is taken to custody transforms during that golden window. So there are 6 modes of rehabilitation. First is religious rehabilitation using clerics or ulema. Second is educational rehabilitation using teachers. Third is vocational rehabilitation using vocational instructors, agriculture, fishery, farming, driving, computers. So when that person graduates from the prison, we give that person a job. Next is social and family rehab, where we look after the family so that the children also don't become like the father or the mother. Then we have song, dance, music. Indonesia has a great culture. This culture must be brought back. If you brought the Indonesian Sanskrita, there will be no terrorism. If Indonesians become like Saudis, like Wahhabis, like those who come from Medina, where they condemn other faiths and other religions, where they are not tolerant of other religions because they don't allow other religions to have their religious places of worship in Saudi Arabia. So if you bring ideologies from such countries, your country will also, the people will become like that. So it is important to maintain the Indonesian spirit of tolerance. So introduce song, dance, music, puppetry, humanize them. Indonesia has a very rich culture. Make sure that culture is practiced at school, at workplace, and in adult life. Next is psychological rehabilitation, counseling. So to recap, if you want to change a terrorist when he's in custody, that is called the golden period, you have to introduce 6 modes of rehab, 6 approaches to rehabilitation. Religious rehab, educational rehabilitation, vocational rehabilitation, social and family rehabilitation, creative arts in rehab, psychological rehabilitation. If you don't do this, 3 things will happen. One is the terrorist will go and stage attacks when he's released. Like the Jakarta attack, the man was not rehabilitated. He was under the influence of the terrorist ideologues in prison. Second is that person will transmit that ideology that you have to kill non-Muslims. Third is the terrorist becomes a hero. That is called the terrorist iconography. So to prevent a terrorist threat, to prevent infection of ideology, third making a terrorist a hero, we have to introduce rehabilitation. So these are the principal 4 methods of fighting terrorism. Of course, there are other methods. For example, we should have international cooperation where we create exchange of personnel between Indonesia, Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, other countries, where we exchange information because terrorists are always traveling, sharing resources. We have to have common databases. We have to have joint training programs, joint operations. We also have to have sharing of experience and expertise and resources. So, but I want to tell you that the most important 4 things are prevention, preemption, operational action, and rehabilitation. If we can do this, then we can contain the spread of religious exclusivism that leads to extremism and extremism to terrorism. I want to conclude my address by saying that Muslim extremism and Muslim terrorism is not the only threat. We also have left-wing and right-wing extremism. In 2019, March 15th, Australian terrorist called Brenton Tarrant went to New Zealand and attacked a mosque and killed 51 Muslims and others and injured 40 Muslims and others. He was a right-wing extremist. He was driven by Christian fundamentalism. So it is not only Muslims, but we have other cases. But most of the terrorist attacks are due to the misinterpretation of Islam. That is why I'm very happy that you are taking the lead to protect your religion, the image and the reputation of Islam and Muslims was spoiled by Al-Qaeda with the 9/11 attacks, with the Islamic State mounting so many attacks, Bali, with every attack, it diminishes the image of a great faith and a great community. So I ask all of you to take this as your burden, as your responsibility, and move forward. But religious extremism comes also from Buddhism, which is a very peaceful religion. But Om Shinrikyo in Japan, terrorist called Soko Asahara, he misinterpreted Buddhism. There is Hinduism misinterpreted. Judaism, there is a group called Kakkane. RSS, Gandhi was killed by Hindu terrorists, Hindu extremists. So all these religious faiths have been misinterpreted and misrepresented. People have killed in the name of faith. Other than religious extremism, we also have left-wing and right-wing extremism. Japanese Red Army, Bader-Meinhof, Action Direct, Action Direct, Communist Combatant Cells. These are all communist or red terrorist groups, left-wing groups. Then we have also ethno-nationalist groups, Tamil Tigers, IRA, Irish Republican Army, PKK, Kurdish Workers' Party, ETA in Spain. So the main categories of terrorists are religious terrorists, ethno-nationalist terrorists. Then we have the left-wing and right-wing terrorists. And more recently, we have single-issue terrorists, those who go and kill for environmental reasons. So we have to prevent this by building strong security and intelligence communities, working with experts, academic experts, professional experts, and working together as one family. I'm very happy to take your questions. I thank you very much.
All right, thank you for the great explanations, Professor. It was such a fascinating topic, science explanations. But before we head to the Q&A sessions, let me highlight some important point here. That first, the terrorism happened in Southeast Asia is a reflection of global threat terrorism. And secondly, regarding how do we respond terrorism actions, particularly how the state can strike back, there are four principal strategies. The first is to prevent extremism ideologies by control the religious space. And then the second is preemptions in terms of the high control of intelligence, set of law, and military forces that monitors what's happening in society, both in person and also in the social media. And then the third one is called the operation forces in collaborations with international community, like international police. We have also Densus 88 here in Indonesia. And the last, Professor Rohan is introducing 6 stages of rehabilitations, which is religion, education, vocational, social and family, cultural approach, and also psychological approach. It also important to note that although religious is not the only terrorist action exists, however, most of the terrorist attacks is a faith-based cases. All right, heading to the Q&A sessions, I saw some of the questions appeared in the chat box. Let me read it for you, Professors. From Fathur Rozi. Which one is more dangerous, religion-based terrorists or ideological terrorists? And does the way dealing with ideological terrorists is the same with religion-based terrorists? Maybe you can answer it directly, professors.
So left and right-wing terrorism is called ideological-based terrorism. But I want to tell you that religious terrorism is also ideological-based, but it's different from left-wing and right-wing terrorism. So I want to share with you that religious fundamentalism or religious exclusivism leads to religious extremism and religious terrorism. But religious terrorism has killed much more people than those killed by left-wing and right-wing groups. Today in the Western countries, the right-wing groups are killing more people than religious extremism. But historically, religious extremism killed more people even in the Western countries. But globally, overall, religious extremism and religious terrorism is the #1 killer. So we have to contain the wave of religious extremism by working together with religious institutions, by working together with the criminal justice and prison system, by working together with the law enforcement, with the intelligence services and the military forces. It's a big challenge. It is a challenge of this early 21st century. We have not yet found a good solution to it. We are still grappling with it. So I hope your institution will produce great scholars and specialists, especially because Surabaya witnessed one of the major terrorist attacks where a number of churches were attacked by family members. Second wave of attacks were fortunately disrupted. So this is a threat that is global. This is a threat that is regional. This is a threat that is national. This is a threat that is local.
All right, thank you, Professor, for the answer. Another questions are coming from Ferdian. Good evening, professors. I'd like to ask, does this golden period of rehabilitation that you mentioned earlier had certain time span? How long it's usually going on? How is it usually vary per conflict, as in the characteristic or degree of the extremism, etc.? Maybe you could answer it, professor.
The degree of radicalization determines the degree of radicalization determines the duration and the intensity of rehabilitation. So if you look at those who are arrested, say for example, in Singapore, or in Malaysia, or Thailand, or Philippines, or Indonesia, depending on the offense they have committed, they will be detained. This is the practice of the criminal justice and prison system. But in my view, we have to change that. We should not release anyone, even if that person completes the prison sentence, if that person is still a radical. This law is called the law of continued detention, which the British have started to practice. Because when the British freed some terrorists after their prison sentence, they went and killed. So I think that this is a good practice that we should all follow. This is not a problem of Indonesia or Southeast Asia. This is a global problem. This is everywhere, including where I am currently based. I'm based in Sri Lanka. And I can tell you that we suffered something called the Easter Sunday attack in 2019. And this attack, after this attack, the main economy of our country was destroyed because of the Easter Sunday attack. And after that, we had COVID. Then we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So our economy never recovered. And as a result, the country became very difficult to govern because of the lack of fuel, the lack of resources, foreign exchange, because tourism almost died. So I think that we have to protect every country from terrorism. It's like Bali. When Bali took place, tourists didn't want to come, right? So if you want economic prosperity, you have to protect your own country. And you have to help other countries to protect their countries. So this is a global problem. Indonesia is a very beautiful country. I have been to Indonesia. People are very beautiful, but there's a very small percentage who are radicalized by religion. It's the same in Sri Lanka. It is the same everywhere in the world. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Another question is also coming from Saifuddin Umar. What your comment for Sri Lanka crisis? Is there any connection to global jihad maybe? If you could really explain about it, please.
There was a major terrorist attack in Sri Lanka called the Easter Sunday attack. That is April 2019. The religious extremist led by Zahran Hashim, he killed nearly 260 foreigners and Sri Lankans in hotels and in churches. I have interviewed his wife. I have interviewed the head of the military wing of the Islamic State, Sri Lanka branch. So I want to tell you that with that attack, Sri Lanka lost its main pillar of economy. This attack is largely influenced by the attacks against churches that have taken place in Indonesia and in Philippines, in Africa, in the Middle East. That is why we all have to come together to fight terrorism. If a terrorist attack takes place in any one country, that can have an impact in another country. For example, the killing of Muslims by a Christian extremist in Christchurch was used as a legitimacy by Zahran Hashim in Sri Lanka. Of course, he had prepared the attack in Sri Lanka much before the Christchurch attack. Christchurch attack was March 15th, 2019. And the Easter Sunday attack was April 19th, 2019. So it was prepared before, but he said that he is attacking this because of Christchurch. So I want to tell you that we must make sure that Muslims are told the true story of motivation, and we will do everything possible to fight religious extremism.
All right. I also see an interesting questions here in the chat box from Prihandono. How is Al-Qaeda's influence on the recent trend of terrorism in Southeast Asia? So, Professor, how do you think about it?
Al-Qaeda has been on the decline with the rise of the Islamic State. But last year, Al-Qaeda had a huge victory. Can you tell me what that is? Al-Qaeda's patron, the Taliban, came to power in August 15th, 2022 in Afghanistan. And now Al-Qaeda has become a very powerful organization again. So Al-Qaeda is operating in Indonesia, in Philippines, in Bangladesh, in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, in Africa, and a number of countries in the Middle East. So we have to focus both on Al-Qaeda, which is the mother of Islamic State, or Daesh, or ISIS, and we have to also focus on the Islamic State. There are other religious extremist groups. These are the two principal groups that threaten us.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rohan. Maybe is that answering your questions, Mr. Prihandono? Maybe you have some additional comment on this, or is it enough? Okay, thank you. Then next, move to the next questions from Anjuno Farov Hasudungan. Thank you, Professor. How about identity politics and populism in Indonesia? Is it over? And the issue of Ustadz Abdul Somad, if you may read the news recently in Singapore.
My view is this: Singapore has a very strict policy. It will not permit anyone, whether it is a Christian, a Buddhist, Hindu, or a Muslim, who has crossed the red line. Red line means has attacked another religion, or has advocated extremist ideas. This is the way Singapore keeps Singapore safe. So I believe that we have to ensure that religious knowledge is something very sacred, and no one should use religion for political reasons. Someone use religion for political reasons, for personal or political reasons, we have to examine that case very carefully. We have had enough attacks motivated by religious extremism. I personally interviewed the Bali bombers, and I believe that we have to give the right understanding of Islam, which is a very beautiful religion, so that we will not allow any religion to be used, misused, or abused by people. This must be our gold standard.
All right, thank you, Professor. Fully agree with you on this. There maybe, is there anyone who wants to ask the questions? You can raise your hand virtually, or maybe you can type on your chat box. Is there anyone? Okay, another question is coming. I think it's an interesting topic. from Diasinta. Good evening, Professor Rohan. What is the difference between rehabilitations, de-radicalizations, and disengagement? And which one is better to counter terrorism? Thank you.
Rehabilitation is the overall effort. Rehabilitate means you restore a person to the original self, because no one is born extremist, no one is born a terrorist, right? So we have to make sure that if a person got these hateful ideas and ideologies, we give this person a very good cleansing, remove those bad thoughts, replace those negative ideas with positive ideas. We have to do it. De-radicalization is just working on that person's radical ideology. But rehabilitation is much more. You introduce to that person song, dance, music, puppetry, culture, which is Indonesian culture. Indonesian culture is the best antidote against extremism. Right? Take these terrorists to see the Indonesian museum. What a rich and a beautiful museum. Take this person on a journey to Bali, the art and the craft of Bali. So I think that de-radicalization is just a small part of rehabilitation. Disengagement is you tell this person, you can have your ideology, but can't go and engage in violence. I think this is only a partial success. The real success is to change that person's ideology of hate, ideology of prejudice, ideology of resentment, ideology of suspicion, ideology of anger, because a person engages in violence only if you have suspicion, prejudice, resentment, hate, anger, and violence. So we have to work on all that. That's why rehabilitation starts from the point of arrest. Even after release, we have to constantly monitor those who are released until they die. We have to engage them and engage their family members. We are currently spending 10% on rehab and 90% on operational action. In my view, we should spend 90% on prevention and rehabilitation and 10% on operational action. We have to change this because the iceberg, terrorism is just the top. Large part of the iceberg is exclusivism or fundamentalism and extremism.
All right, thank you for such a great explanations. Is there anything from the participant wants to maybe give a comment or ask questions to Professor Rohan? I also wonder actually, Professor, if I am allowed to ask questions. So, so before this, maybe we can head to Fahrul Rozi first, who raised his hand. Could you please open your mic? All right, I think he typed the questions on the chat box. Professors, which extremist group do you think Indonesia still need to look out for nowadays? And with the emergence of the so-called lone wolf terrorists just several years ago in Indonesia, has there been any change in the approach to counter terrorism in Indonesia? All right, that's the questions, Professor.
Indonesian challenge is both terrorist groups and terrorist individuals. We have to fight both. So I am asking from you to spend more time and resources to fight the ideology, especially the ideology online, to build the legislation so that anyone who preach hate is arrested. Anyone who espouse violence, anyone who incites violence is arrested. This legislation is very, very weak. You have to do that. Then you have to ban extremist groups, legally ban them, and list extremist activists so that we start the process of dismantling extremist organizations and arrest those who are extremists. We should not wait until a terrorist attack happens to do this. You can see me now, right?
Yes.
Until now, I was in the dark.
I see you, Professor.
Any other questions?
Is that answering your questions, Mr. Fahru Rozi? All right, I guess it was quite clear. And so back to my questions before. If there's anyone want to ask the questions, please raise your hand or just type in the chat box while I'm delivering my own questions. So it's kind of
Professor,
okay. Oh,
sorry, my question has not answered about identity politics and populism in Indonesia. Is over. The first question.
The first questions.
How about identity politics and populism in Indonesia?
Oh, I think I cannot.
Professor Rohan answer is Abdul Zomat issue in Singapore.
All right, maybe could you please explain a bit further, Professor?
Okay. You want to know about identity politics and populism. One is that identity politics is based on ethnicity and religion. We must not allow anyone to exploit ethnicity and religion to divide the communities. The Indonesian state is a fragile state. If you permit people to play with ethnicity and religion, set one community against the other, it will destabilize Indonesia. So globally, we must be very careful of anyone who play in the domain of identity politics. In my personal view, people can campaign for Indonesia. But if people campaign for any particular community, ethnic or religious community in Indonesia, that can lead to a conflict in the future. So we have to keep those identity politics away because it's not going to help to strengthen Indonesia's stability and security. This doesn't apply only to Indonesia. This applies to all the countries in the world. We must not allow exploitation of ethnicity or religion.
Thank you, Professor Rohan. Is enough for me.
Thank you, Professor. And thank you, Mr. Fahru Rozi. I think another question is coming from Ferdian. What is the connection between Al-Qaeda and Jamaah Islamiyah and between ISIS and Jamaah Ansarud Daurah? Maybe you can answer, Professor.
So the first question is, what is the relationship between Al-Qaeda and Jamaah Islamiyah?
Jamaah Islamiyah, right?
Very good. the leadership of Jamaat Islamiyah, Abu Bakr Bashir, he traveled to Pakistan and then to Afghanistan. And then he introduced the Al-Qaeda ideology to this region. And head of operations of Jamaat Islamiyah, Isamuddin Ridwan or Hambali, who is now in Guantanamo Bay, he was the Al-Qaeda point person in Southeast Asia. He planned many attacks, including Bali attack. So Al-Qaeda is the main organization that funded the Bali attack and that trained the people how to make bombs, how to make surveillance. So you can say Jamaat Islamiyah is an extension of Al-Qaeda. Jamaat Islamiyah emerged from an early organization called Darul Islam. But the Jamaat Islamiyah is a breakaway faction of Darul Islam. Darul Islam fought for something else, to create an Islamic state in Indonesia. But Jamaat Islamiyah fought for creating an Islamic state in Southeast Asia. So a number of Jamaat Islamiyah members were trained in Al-Qaeda camps. And Al-Qaeda operators visited Southeast Asia and met Jamaat Islamiyah members. The relationship is very close. The second question that was asked is, what is the relationship between Ansar Tawheed
and ISIS?
Dawla, yes. Ansar Dawla is supporters of the Islamic State. It is a part of the Islamic State, IS. There's no difference in their ideology. I have interviewed the leader of this group, Aman Abdul Rahman. He is a strong supporter of the Islamic State. In fact, in prison, I asked him, I said, if you are released tomorrow, what will you do? He said that he'll go to Iraq and Syria. So I want to tell you that these are religious fanatics. And it requires a long-term effort to de-radicalize them. Unfortunately, he is not being de-radicalized. I think that even though he is going to be executed, because he has been given the death sentence, it is important for religious leaders to go and talk to him and explain to him about his wrong ideology. But you must be very careful that the religious cleric you send to meet Aman Abdul Rahman doesn't get radicalized, because Aman Abdul Rahman is an expert radicalizer and a recruiter. So you have to select them very carefully and send them so that they will explain to Aman Abdul Rahman, in the name of Allah, in the name of Islam, in the name of Muslims, people should not be killed and property should not be destroyed. But this message has not been given, and it should be given.
All right, is that answering your questions, Ferdian? Or do you have any comments on this maybe? Okay, I think it's the following questions. If the leader or key person cannot be de-radicalized, does that mean the last option is executions, or he will continue being a subject of research?
The person who cannot be de-radicalized should be isolated, should not have interaction with others. Only those who are designated to rehabilitate them or de-radicalize them should meet them. Otherwise, they will infect others with their ideology. It's a very cancerous ideology. Very infectious, like COVID. COVID, you recover, but if you get this ideology, you die with it or you live with it forever. hating other religions and other communities. So I think that we have to be very careful. I think that we have to de-radicalize them. Sometimes we can't de-radicalize the leader, but members we can, because they are not so much radicalized. Then we have to de-radicalize their supporters and sympathizers also. It's a very big effort. So I ask all of you to go and meet with prisoners and their families. Make this your project. So your center will become very famous. And will do a big service to Indonesia and the world.
So you agree of being a subject of research?
Absolutely. Research means, what is research? Research is the basic knowledge. Research, if you don't do research, you can't resolve problems.
A cool answer, Professor. Thank you. I think someone is raising his hands. Mr. Saifuddin Umar, could you please open your microphone?
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Saifuddin, I think you are still muted. Oh, he's lower his hand. Maybe another questions coming. Is there any other questions from the participant? You could send your questions directly or maybe type on your chat box. From Mr. Prihandano again, is there any conflict between Al-Qaeda and ISIS cells in Southeast Asia? Interesting, Professor. What do you think about it?
They have had many disagreements, ideological, but in the battlefield, they have cooperated. So, for example, in the Philippines, we have the Abu Sayyaf group, which is linked to Al-Qaeda. Then we have the Islamic State group influencing so many other groups in the Philippines. The BIFF, right? The breakaway factions of Abu Sayyaf and MILF. But they are not fighting each other. They have disagreements. So they don't physically get into a fight. But there are other theaters where they have fought each other in Africa, in the Middle East. And of course, the biggest fighting between Al-Qaeda and Islamic State is in Afghanistan, where the Islamic State Khorasan province is constantly attacking Taliban, because Taliban is Al-Qaeda ideology. And Taliban is constantly attacking Islamic State Khorasan province. So sometimes there is infighting, but in this region there is a live and a let live policy.
All right, thank you, Professor. We still have enough time and enough time to discuss. Maybe you are going to give your comment. Mr. Saifuddin, you raise your hand.
Yes, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Listen me. Hello?
Yeah, you're
okay.
audible.
Okay. Thank you very much. From Mr. Rohan, I am Abu Fida. Hello. I will ask you concept for collective deradicalization. For concept, what you concept for collective deradicalization, and what you comment for Tamil. I hear and I see you writing you book or you written you have wrote to for Tamil collective deradicalization. What your concept for collective deradicalization in Indonesia? Thank you very much, Mr. Rohan. Thank you.
So let me explain to the participants the importance of this question, because this is a very, very important question that has been raised. When we fight terrorism, we have to do two types of de-radicalizations. One is two types of rehabilitation. One is the individual, because the individual's ideology is based on the group ideology, the ideology of the organization. So we have to develop the template to fight the ideology of the group. But we have to also understand that every person is unique and develop the ideological content to counter that person's ideology. So we need to do both. Right? So yes. I want to share with you that in the case of the Tamil Tigers in Sri Lanka, the entire group was defeated. And what we did was we shared the Sri Lankan spirit with them. Because the Tamil Tigers were fighting to create a separate state in the Northeast. So we did promote religious rehab because their own religion, they are Christians and Hindus, they are not Muslims. So we said, according to Christianity, you can't kill. According to Hinduism, you can't kill. So Christian priests and Hindu priests spoke to them about the beauty of their religion. Second is, we got their teachers to educate them. Because the Tamil Tigers, they didn't allow the children to study, very ignorant. We educated. Then vocational training. We got the private companies. I myself went and spoke to the blue chip companies. Aries, John Keels, Virtusa, brought them in. They created industrial plants to teach them agriculture, fishery, farming, driving, right? Beauty culture. So they had a job after they graduated. Then social and family rehab. The NGOs played a very important role to look after the children. Then finally, creative arts in rehab. Sri Lanka is a rich, culturally rich country like Indonesia. And then we also did psychological rehab, counseling. Because all these people have some hatred in them. You have to, in a very friendly way, identify it and remove it. It's a big effort. So we have to de-radicalize or rehabilitate the entire group, understanding their ideology, break down their ideology. But we also have to work on the individuals, so at the group level and at the individual level. Rehabilitation program in Sri Lanka was a huge success. But unfortunately, the Islamic State program, where the Islamic State terrorists attacked on Easter Sunday, the churches and the hotels, this program has not taken off because some organizations have filed court cases saying that rehabilitation should be a part of the main law, not administered through a gazette. So Sri Lanka has to pass comprehensive legislation through Parliament. Until then, those terrorists are in prison. So my view is that we have to do it. So there are many problems of rehabilitation. The operational rehabilitation, doing it, functional rehabilitation is not a big challenge. The legal, getting the legal clearances and doing it is important. Fortunately, in Indonesia, rehabilitation is accepted by the criminal justice and prison system. And Indonesia has a program, but need more resources, more experts, That's why I'm asking the academic community, including your center, to go and do this in the prisons.
All right, thank you, Professor Rohan. Does it answer your questions clearly, Mr. Saifuddin? Do you have maybe another following questions or comments on this? I guess it is clear. All right, is there any other questions from all the participants? Or maybe comments? Maybe, okay. Thanks very much, Professor Rohan from Mr. Saifuddin. And from Mr. Ferdian, we have Mr. Ferdian here. Honestly, because I think my environment isn't where I might encounter radicals or extremists, I probably cannot fathom how their network grow even among people I encounter in daily life, but feels like in Indonesia, always need to be on the lookout for these extremist minds. We only know how serious it was when it's on the news or when a bombing happened. Also, Professor, I'd like to know if there's a different approach in de-radicalizations for men, women, and teenagers. Well, such a great question. Maybe, Professor, you could answer it directly.
The ideology is the same. So whether it's a man or a woman doesn't matter. But I want to share with you that motherhood is important. I met so many women terrorists in Indonesian custody. And they sometimes were impregnated by the terrorist handler. And I still remember one woman carrying her child. So I think that it is important when we do the rehabilitation, we have to speak about children. We have to speak about the responsibility of being a mother so that we can dissuade them from this extremist mindset. So I think that we have to use very effective techniques to prevent women from becoming terrorists. I remember there's a terrorist attack by an Indonesian couple, husband and wife. They attacked the Holo Cathedral in the Philippines. In January of 2019, I myself went and saw the cathedral. The woman came, she stood in the middle of the cathedral and she blasted. Her head went up and was somewhere in the ceiling. Then the security forces and the medical ambulances, the firefighters, they all came, and also people start to go out, run out. Then her husband came and he blasted. So this is a husband and wife suicide attack. Right. So you can see, for them to commit crime of that scale and magnitude, we have to ask our Muslim religious leaders to tell that according to Islam, you can't do this. So there's a lot more we have to do. Even if you look at the Surabaya bombings, the husband, wife, and the children. I know that the children don't want to do the attack because they know there's something wrong. But the husband and wife try to convince the children that we are all going to meet in heaven together. So I think that we have to focus more on countering the ideology. This is something we have to do. And we have to especially get the women and explain to them that this is not according to the beautiful preachings of Islam. mothers, daughters, sisters, grandmothers, they should all speak about moderation, toleration, and coexistence. They should speak about the beauty of other religions so that no one will go and attack another religion.
All right, that's how the importance of mother's role, mom's role, women's role in counter terrorism, like maybe not only from the rehabilitation stage, since from the prevention stage, it was very important on this. Guardian said that it's really sad when hearing children are involved. Thank you for your explanations, Professor. Yes, it's kind of goosebumps. All right.
The answer right now, hi, I just joined this call that Professor gave regarding the husband and wife. Professor reminds me of the husband and wife duo attack in Shangri-La in Sri Lanka of Fatima Jifri and Ilham Ibrahim at the Easter attack in Sri Lanka. So I want to ask you, Professor, is this a common thing for husband and wives to get together and coordinate or take part in attacks?
My colleague from Sri Lanka, Amina, she is our ambassador of peace. She has asked me to share with you about an aspect of the Easter Sunday attack in Sri Lanka that I have not shared with you. That is, the husband, Ilham, went to Shangri-La Hotel in Colombo and he blasted. And his wife, who was pregnant with her 2 children, blasted when the police came to speak to her after the husband committed suicide. Police came just to interview her. But then she had a bomb and she blasted that bomb. She was already pregnant, so she didn't carry a big bomb. She carried a small 1.5 liter bottle of explosives. She threw that, and then after that exploded, there was another bigger bomb that also blasted. So this woman was radicalized to a very high extent because her family members told us how to relax. She will read the writings of Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the founder of the Islamic State. She will listen to nasheeds, the Islamic State songs. And she believed, or her husband radicalized her to a point where she believed that both of them can meet in heaven. But she wanted to meet in heaven with the children. So the husband, Ilham, wanted this attack postponed until the child is born. Because there's a rumor among the terrorists that if the child is not born and the child also dies during the attack, child will never go to heaven. So these are all stories, made by the terrorists. But the terrorist leader said, no, I want to attack on Easter Sunday. So the wife committed suicide with the unborn child. So to motivate her, the husband told 5 things. One is, if you do an attack, you will enter paradise, you will have audience with God, you will be forgiven for your sins and vices. You can take 70 relatives to heaven, and you can also have 72 beautiful girls. So I want to tell you that these stories are being shared by the extremists who want to recruit people. But I think God is very merciful. He will not reward anyone who kill, anyone who harm, anyone who hurt. So that is why I'm asking all of you, please work with the ulama, please work with the asatisas to counter these false beliefs. because only the law enforcement, only D88 can't end terrorism. Terrorism has to be fought at the ideological level when fundamentalism or exclusivism is spreading, extremism level, not only at the tactical or the operational level when the terrorist is going to do an attack. So we have to use the education system, the religious system, and the media, the information system to counter this. That is why all of you all can play a very important role to promote the right understanding of Islam. As I mentioned, Islam is a beautiful religion. It's a great faith. It has brought so much of civilization. And we have to promote local and traditional culture to prevent these extremist ideologies reaching our shores from abroad that are politically motivated. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you, Ms. Amina, for joining us today. And I'm really sorry to hear such a saddening story we've heard before. It's kind of really sad how the children forced to involve to the terrorism act here. Maybe regarding to the your last statement here, I was kind of curious. I'm wondering to what extent, like maybe poverty or social background and maybe educational background became the main reason of someone to the terrorist act instead of the faith or religious reason.
Terrorists are recruiting from a cross-section of society, from the rich, the poor, the educated, and the less educated. I'll give you a good example. The leader of Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, came from the richest non-royal Saudi family. The current leader of Al-Qaeda, Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, comes from a very educated family of doctors, of university professors. The former leader of the Islamic State, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he has a PhD. So I want to share with you that terrorists, there are educated terrorists and there are uneducated terrorists. There are very wealthy terrorists and there are very poor terrorists. For example, the terrorist Ilham that attacked Shangri-La, he came from the richest spice trader in Sri Lanka. His son, the richest spice trader is Ibrahim Hajiar. His son was Ilham. And the Sri Lankan bombers who came from the western province, they were all very wealthy. The Sri Lankan terrorists who came from the eastern province, they were middle class or poor. So terrorism doesn't distinguish. It is the ideology that is the main driver. So we have to counter the ideology. Unfortunately, in the Western scholarship, they don't study about ideology. They see whether someone is psychologically stable, unstable, right? They see whether someone is poor or rich, someone is educated or not. But the real reason, the driver of terrorism is belief. We have to work on the ideology, fixing the ideology.
Thank you, Professor. Such a clear, great answer. All right. Is there any questions or comments? Maybe you also allowed to share your own experience for the participants, your own experience maybe in combating the terrorism, or maybe, yeah, your comment on this topic is welcome.
So for 18 years, I worked as the head of the International Center for Political Violence and Terrorism Research in Singapore. And our specialist center trained so many experts, including your current Home Minister, General Professor Tito Karnavian. He was my PhD student, a brilliant practitioner and a scholar. His book was published by Imperial College Press. Before he became the current Home Minister, he was police chief. Before that, he was head of BNPT. Before that, he was police chief in Papua. I visited him in Papua. He was Jakarta police chief. Before that, he was in D88, Densus 88, the counterterrorism chief. Before that, he was counterterrorism intelligence chief. So I want to share with you that I would encourage Indonesians to go overseas and study like General Tito Karnavia. General Tito's first degree is from Massey University in New Zealand, second degree from Exeter, third degree from my university in Singapore. So I think that we have to educate our leaders so that they will make intelligent decisions. Education is key. I have educated more than 100 Indonesian counterterrorism officers. And those who were trained, they did brilliantly. So education is key.
Thank you for the strong message, professors. And I think that wrap up our discussions. If I'm not mistaken, yeah, there's no questions coming. And that's maybe wrap up our discussions tonight. It was such a great and insightful discussions with you, Professor. Before we close these discussions, maybe let me conclude with the most important point, with the strongest message we can draw from these discussions tonight. That the international community have to come together to encounter terrorism in all of its forms, be it religious terrorism or ideological terrorism. So we have to be hand in hand together to encounter the terrorism attack, particularly in the Southeast Asia and globally in general. All right, thank you very much for joining us today, Professor Rohan and Ms. Amina and all the participants. It was such a good pleasure to conduct the discussions tonight, and thank you for the committee as well for trusting me to be the moderator tonight. My apologies for any unintentional mistakes happened throughout the discussions. And I hope we'll meet again in the near future. I hope to see you in person, Professor Rohan, maybe in Indonesia or maybe in Singapore in the near future, maybe. Thank you for joining us tonight and have a great day, everyone. See you and stay healthy. I'll give back the screen to the committee. Maybe you would like to deliver something to the committee, or yeah, I'll give back the screen to the committee. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, January. Thank